Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all our lead integrity members, partners, visitors, and anyone who happens to be in passing. We are delighted to be able to celebrate World Interfaith Harmony Week with a series of interviews, discussions, but also movie, documentary screening, op-eds, which we're delighted to share. Today, we are particularly grateful and very happy, I am at any rate, to have Mr. Daniel Perell with us today. Now, Daniel is a very good friend, a member in the solidarity movement for the sake of multilateralism and human rights for many, many years. And in his official capacity, Daniel serves as the Baha'i International Community representative to the United Nations, and he has occupied this role since 2011. Currently, he leads on the Baha'i International Community's engagement at the annual COP Climate Conference, along with discussions on UN reform and global governance. I strongly recommend that you visit Daniel's work and be familiar with it. He has very concise analysis, which is extremely helpful and definitive on a number of issues happening in our global community, particularly aspects related to sustainable development, human rights, and obviously within that, the environmental dynamics. Mr. Perell has chaired several civil society bodies and collaborates with former heads of state and ministers to shape civil society contributions to UN deliberations. Recently, Mr. Perell spent 3 months in rural Kenya to learn about local development and community projects. He is co-host of the UN Necessary, and if you read it together, it's unnecessary, very cool pun this, UN Necessary podcast on the future of multilateralism in a turbulent world. He received a JD from the University of Virginia School of Law and an MA in Law and Diplomacy from the Fletcher School at Tufts University. Mr. Daniel Perell, we are delighted to have you with us here today for a conversation during World Interfaith Harmony Week, where we seek, with many experts like yourself, deep thinkers like yourself, to identify who are quite comfortable being faith inspired, openly comfortable to be faith, represent where possible their faith community. Many don't, by the way, but are still faith inspired. In your case, we have a delightful 2-in-1 combo. And the key question on the table for our discussion here today is to get your insight and wisdom on the value added of interfaith in this tumultuous world we happen to be living in, where it seems as if everywhere we look, there is a war, a conflict of some sort. There is definitely a retreat in terms of poverty alleviation efforts that have taken place over many, many decades. We are concerned about the welfare, and not just in terms of health, but actually in terms of security, all kinds of security, including food security, and obviously the security of our planet. So these are interesting times. And I know that you have some very, very good reflections to share with us. So maybe just start off, if you don't mind, Daniel, tell us a little bit about what brought you into this space in the first place, especially since you're representing the Baha'is. But if I may say so, I know that you were born Jewish. So there's a wealth of interfaith in you, walking, talking, as it were, and thinking. So tell us a little bit, if you don't mind, about your journey into the space of faith representation, UN politics and poetics, and so on. Over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Azza. It's really a pleasure to be here. And after that bio, I fear that I won't live up to the person that you described, but I'll do my best to fill his shoes. Um, yes, when you sent me this question prior to getting together, I was thinking, isn't it wonderful that we can actually just talk as friends about how we got to this place and what we're reading in the reality and how we're navigating this turbulent world. And so it is actually quite important, as I think for all of us, to start with a personal story, with who we are and what brought us here. So like just say thank you for that opportunity to do so. So I was born in a Jewish family. As I say, the emphasis was on the ish, not on the Jew. And the fact that I am a representative of a faith, if you asked high school Dan, if you gave him 300 careers and this was one of them, this would be at the very bottom of the list. I'm more likely to be an NFL superstar than a faith representative. I was very much a product of, upper middle class America, um, liberal arts, all of these things that didn't really include religion meaningfully in the conversation. And in fact, when I had the benefit of spending some time abroad, um, I came to realize that I really didn't like religion or trust religion in the slightest. It was the cause, as I had read reality, the cause of so many wars and upheavals around the world. And in fact, it was a political tool. And so, why would I be a part of it? And for the most part, the people that I was friends with, this argument resonated with them, except for a few Baha'is who said, "Yes, we agree, and that's why we need religion." And I would say, what are you talking about? How can you end my criticism with you agree, but we need religion? And, they illuminated for me this distinction, which, many actual religious people will say, Dan, you were foolish. How did you not realize? But give me some grace for who I was and who I still am. But, they said to me, that is just man's interpretation of religion. That's not actual religion. If we're talking about actual religion, then it is actually something that inspires, that galvanizes, that unites. And that's actual religion. What we have done to it is a reflection of humanity's difficulties with ego, with selfishness, and with greed. Don't blame religion for that. And so I think that for me reframed how I conceived of religion. And in fact, what ended up happening is I learned about the Baha'i faith most profoundly in Chile when I was spending some time down there. And I came back and I was going to the bat mitzvah of a family member. She had turned 13 and we were having this celebration for her. And I realized that never in my life had I felt more Jewish than in that moment when I started to consider myself a Baha'i, which sounds very strange. Unless you understand religion the way that I have come to understand religion, which is much more like mathematics than foreign languages.
Mm,
So foreign languages are distinct. You can't learn Latin by learning Hindi. It
mm,
just doesn't work that way. But with mathematics, everything builds on each other.
mm,
And so to me, and this is just my understanding, and I mean no disrespect by it, but to me, the first lessons of mathematics are represented, of religion, mathematics, are represented in the early religions, Judaism being one of them. So if we conceive of Judaism as chapter one of this book of mathematics, as the arithmetic. Now, it may be at a time, a later stage, at least is the Baha'i understanding and the understanding of some other religions that talk about progressive revelation. Now we're in a chapter where we need to be doing more trigonometry or algebra or pre-calculus. We still use the rules of arithmetic. They're still there. They're not gone. And so now that I was thinking about trigonometry or calculus, what have you, in my day-to-day life, I actually realized that arithmetic is so vital. And I felt such a strong affinity for arithmetic that I had never felt before. I felt such a connection to Judaism, and I wanted to hear what the rabbi was saying, not fall asleep or look at my watch or wait for whatever bagels and lox they were serving after. But I was really thinking, what is it that this rabbi is trying to teach me about religion? What is this life lesson? And my family, was still doing what my family does. And I was like, guys, this is Judaism. What are we doing? We have to be paying attention. So I went from, this sort of anti-religious-ish person to a Baha'i who felt quite religious Jew person. And it was a very strange personal transformation that has, I think, ultimately led my own journey through life. Initially, I went to law school after my time in Chile, and I got this master's degree and all of this, but always thinking about how I could serve humanity in some way. Not inspired by many of the things that I think inspire many in upper middle class America, which is the pursuit of a good job and a stable family with a big house, but in pursuit of service. And again, I don't want to diminish the importance of all of those qualities, but really thinking about how I could apply what I've learned, what I'm trying to learn about to the betterment of humanity. There happens to be a Baha'i office with representation in New York. When I graduated law school, I didn't have a job, so I came as an intern to the to this office, the Baha'i International Community's UN office. One of the first meetings I attended with my mentor, I'll call her now, with Bani, my former boss and supervisor at that time, was a meeting where Azza was to speak. And I remember one of the first things that happened was Bani turned to me as I was sitting in the back and she said, "Dan, Azza has arrived. Please tell the organizers." And so my job was to scurry up to the front and tell them that Azza had arrived, and now we could actually get into the meat of the meeting. So I've embarrassed you back, dear Azza.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that's very gracious of you, I'm sure. Thank you. And of course, flattery will get you everywhere. I will still go ahead with the tough questions because I know you can handle them. And that was a brilliant, by the way, brilliant expose on the progressive way that religion ties in and the way that arithmetic is so central in the way that Judaism and I would assume every single faith tradition has such a strong foundation that we are all evolving from within that space of faith itself, albeit articulated in different ways. But so that's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that, Dan. It means a lot. And it will be food for plenty of thought. Given what you have witnessed within the realms of the multilateral United Nations in particular space, and given what you know and what you are part of in the interfaith world, can you tell us a little bit about like what are some of your key takeaways from the work of the United Nations, the work of interfaith spaces, and collaborations where they exist? What are some of the things that keep you motivated to do the work you do? And maybe tell us a little bit about the work that you do as well.
Sure. So the foundational principle of the Baha'i faith is that of unity. So I'm going to start, all of my interventions will come from that place. And unity is something I think we're still learning about. We don't even know exactly what it looks like. How do you have unity and then respect diversity and ensure that all of these voices are a part of that shared aspiration? But I think that is actually a key avenue through which to understand my reading of what's happening, both in the interfaith space as well as the international governance space. So right now, the world is organized in various groups of us's. Us, the X, us, the nationality, us, the religion, us, the wealthy, us, the employers, whatever the different groupings are. We have organized ourselves in this way, and there has been some progress achieved through this mechanism, which is, if we are not protecting us, the minorities, well, everybody is actually missing out on the benefits of their contributions. But the problem is if we go so far as to keep on creating all of these different identities, these us's, they start to actually act in opposition to each other. So how do we understand the rights of one when they may actually infringe on the rights of another? And I'll take a very easy example that hopefully won't hurt anyone's heart, which is the needs of present and future generations. This is something we really have to balance. We have people who are starving, that are energy deprived, that lose opportunities because they don't have the material resources necessary. And yet, if we continue on this path of accumulation and excess resource extraction, we are actually doing harm to generations to come. How do we balance this in a spirit of unity? I'm not entirely sure of the answer, except that we need to start questioning some of the assumptions that have long been the foundation of our international order, one of which is this idea of different us's. In the international order at the UN, it's very much state sovereignty centric. So each state has its own needs and it is doing its best for its people, and those on the outside have almost no right to come in. Now, there are times when maybe in emergency circumstances, there would be a collective security element, but it is by and large, sovereignty is wielded as a weapon, whereas it has also been very useful. I don't want to diminish it. Just like taking care of present needs is vital, but also it can have some impact on future needs.
Mm,
In that same spirit, we have to recognize the limitations of state sovereignty. In the interfaith space, we have the same issue.
mm,
We have to see that Islam can be strengthened when the rights of Christians are strengthened. Buddhism is strengthened when the rights of the Zoroastrians are protected. All of this we are together. There's really only us. Now we have these different identities, these different heritages that are super valuable. And I'm not suggesting that they should be buried under an identity of global citizen, but that they form a part of that identity. I am a resident of the United States. I'm an American, a North American. I can't remember how I'm supposed to say it because there are many kinds of Americans, but I'm from the United States. I'm a man, I'm a father, I'm a son, I'm a brother, I'm a Baha'i. I'm all of these things, and none of them are in competition with each other. And
Mm,
yet somehow, when we start to represent ourselves in certain ways in international fora or in interfaith fora, we entrench ourselves in this identity and it becomes a barrier to other options in a sense.
mm,
So how is it that if our foundational principle is that of unity, when is a healthy patriotism, to take state sovereignty as an example, when is a healthy patriotism constructive? And it is in many, we have the Olympics coming up in a week. I actually think that's a very healthy expression of patriotism. And I love it. I love the Olympics, but I don't like competition and nationalism. And I think that's okay. So we have to figure out where are those moments when sovereignty, when patriotism are good things, and then where are the moments when we have to start to figure out, maybe we've taken it a bit too far. And
mm.
I think that's actually a consistent challenge in many dimensions of our lives: faith, nationality, language, wealth level, all of these things, color of our skin, all of these things are various forms of identity that have legitimacy in terms of heritage and story and narrative and character, but also have to come up against the bounds of our oneness as a human family. And that, I think, is a tension that applies across all facets of the international order.
So, two things I think that you inspire in what you've brilliantly shared. One is that do you not think that the United Nations was created to protect that unity, so to speak, harvest it, nurture it, and protect it? Was that not the original ambition? But also, don't one of the things I'm missing in what you've shared is we often hear a lot about identity and how important it is, and yet how fractious and divisive it can be. But at the same time, we seem to ignore the rule of law, which is fundamentally what we're supposed to observe, whether we are secular, religious, northern, southern, eastern, western, sovereign state or not, which isn't the case, but the rule of law, international order is meant to be based in international norms, values, i.e., international law. So it isn't that identity operates separately, and it certainly shouldn't. It is supposed to be that we relate to each other on the basis of laws. And laws protect us. They protect sovereignty, but they also protect the welfare and the common good for our entire planet, supposedly. And we often don't hear that emphasis on law enough because we're so busy trying to identify that which is keeping us apart. But in what you said also, Dan, I'm hearing, is it the case that whether it's the religious world or the secular nation state world, that they're both kind of suffering? So does one not help the other, so to speak? Are they two completely separate existences? Because it sounds like the religious world is indeed suffering from that divisive us's and the sovereignty of one particular religion over another, if you will. Um, is that the case? Is that what has your experience been in terms of the value added of the realms of faith working together to the realms of nation states and communities working together?
You have asked me three very big questions. I shall do my best. On the first one about the intent of the founders of the UN Charter, those 50 some odd nation states that came together at that time, I think a very generous reading is one where they're trying to preserve the unity of the human family. And I think in their heart of hearts, many of them indeed were trying to do so, and I choose to read them thusly. But that also would be ignoring a little bit of the political realities of the moment. That it was written, I mean, there's enemy states still written about in the UN Charter right now. Now, these are enemy states like Germany and Japan, which today I don't know that anybody would want to be calling them enemy states because we're in a community of nations, but it's still written in the charter that they are enemy states. So the charter in itself actually has an adversarial dimension to it, embedded in it. Now, I think it was with the aspiration of one day achieving a degree of unity of the human family, of the community of nations. And I think, and we know, in fact, that the UN Charter was meant to be revisited. Article 109 of the UN Charter calls for a revisiting of the UN Charter within 10 years of signing. In fact, that's the reason why the veto power was permitted, because there was a promise of reform of the UN Charter, which would have been a reform of the veto power of the P5. So this is maybe getting a little bit into the weeds, but there is a dimension of this about how much is it that they were preserving the unity of the whole family, how much of it was about their political primacy, economic primacy, the entrenchment of certain values. I think that there are many different things that can be true at the same time, and I wouldn't want to flatten them either to this was just a dose of realism on the heels of World War II, nor to the idealistic, notions that this was, going to create peace on earth. I think it was the best that they could have done at the time, and I credit them for that, and I thank them for that. And God bless those folks for coming together as they did, because we have benefited so much from it. But like any system, it ages, and we need to figure out what to do with that aging. The second issue that you raised had to do with the rule of law. Now, I agree entirely that the rule of law, when it is violated, there need to be some repercussions. We need to actually have the strength of our conviction, the courage of our conviction, and the capacity for ensuring that violators of law are held accountable. There is a question about the universal jurisdiction of international courts. In the United States, if I commit a crime, I don't get to opt out of jurisdiction. I am under the jurisdiction of my local and my state and my nation. But somehow I'm not under the jurisdiction of international law, though believe you me, I live on this planet. Sometimes my wife might say I don't, but I promise you that I do. So it is kind of strange that we can opt out of international law when we can't opt out of domestic or local law. So these sorts of cognitive tensions we haven't properly negotiated as a human family. And that's why I think you see that international law gets such little respect. Now, normatively, it's great, and human rights advocates and international lawyers are able to use it, and in some cases it achieves some results. But we see article after article in foreign policy and foreign affairs about the utility and the capacity of our international legal system. In part, I think it's actually a question of what are we trying to achieve through international law? Is it a justice by the sword or at the end of a gun, or is it a justice that allows human flourishing? Most of our justice systems in the West, anyway, are primarily built on an adversarial understanding of justice, where you have one aggrieved party and one party accused party, and they go at each other, and you decide who's telling the truth or who's more likely than not to be telling the truth, and that's justice. In other parts of the world, justice is actually about how a community deals with some kind of threat to its sense of well-being, of what's right. And there's actually a communal justice. My thesis at the Fletcher School was about what the US legal system could learn from Afghanistan. I
Mhm.
was writing at a time when the US was trying to export its legal system to Afghanistan. There are many good things about the US legal system, but there are also some community-based things about the Afghan legal system, numerous challenges notwithstanding on both sides. There are certain lessons about different conceptions of justice that one could say should be learned all over the world. And so I think we really, I mean, I've gone far on a tangent, and thank you for saying you're not going to edit this because now I have some regrets. But on
Mhm.
the idea of justice and law, I think we really have a lot more exploration to do,
Mhm.
and we need compulsory jurisdiction at the international level. I think that to me is kind of just a fact of the world as it exists. Now, the final question you've asked me about the relationship, I would say, between the interfaith world, the multi-faith world, and the intergovernmental world, the UN world, the secular state world.
Before you go there, forgive me.
Please.
I do need you to elaborate on that very much. I just want to make a quick comment on what you just said in terms of what we have to figure out in terms of law. I think that the various practices of law obviously differ, and the communal dimension that you brought out so beautifully is very, very valid and important. I don't think we have to figure the law out. I think we have to figure out how to apply it. And there's a very different thing there that we need to make sure, because I think what we're hearing now and the way we're seeing certain behaviors of certain nation states, certain leaders, is as if the law itself doesn't really matter. Whereas we're trying to argue, look, there are faults for sure, but adherence and application have to be a priority for our world order to be sustained, whether at individual, family, community, or national, international level. That is an important point to bear in mind, because we often forget it in the, as you said, in the weeds of the legal dynamics themselves and the way that it's juxtaposed. We often forget that just because it's imperfect, it does not excuse us from adhering and seeking to perfect the justice that is collective for all of us. So that just a small point that I think matters a lot in this discussion. And I raised the question of international law because I know that that's one of your big areas of specialization. So thank you for bringing that out. Now, with that in mind, the applicability of laws, norms, etc., please go ahead and tell us more about how you see the international multi-faith and the multinational secular spaces.
Yeah, I actually think that clarification as always was super helpful. I was thinking about an analogy because I think, as you know, I think in terms of analogies. Um, we have always known that apples fall down when you drop them. We didn't always know exactly how fast, 9.8 meters per second squared. We didn't always know that, but it doesn't change the reality that apples fall down. So we had to do a lot of study and understanding about the laws of physics. It doesn't mean that the laws didn't exist. And I think what you're saying, and I would agree very much, is that the fact of the law is a fact, and we have to abide by the law. And what I'm saying is that maybe we're at 9.6 meters per second squared or 10 meters per second squared, and we just have to figure out 9.8 because that's actually quite important in order for us to, go to space. But it's not that important for us to drop the apple. And so I think that you're right. Like in terms of apple dropping, we have figured it out enough that we need to be doing it. In terms of, getting a space shuttle out of into orbit, we still maybe have a little bit of work to do. But yes, that's a long way of saying yes with my strange analogy. So, one of the realities of the world, as far as I see it, is that there are kind of two different ways of describing reality. One is the physical manifestation of reality. This is the apples dropping. And the other is what I would call a spiritual dimension of reality. And both of these things are true. And in fact, I heard this great quote that I won't try and restate because I can't remember exactly how it was phrased. But essentially, what it was saying is that the things that are most real in our lives are the things which we cannot measure. Love, beauty, poetry, music. You were going to say something?
Faith.
Faith. These are things that are most real in our lives. When you look at your child, when you look at your mother, like that, there's a thing that you get. But we can't measure that using our SDGs. We can try, maybe. But for so long, we have said that if you cannot measure a thing, it doesn't exist, which is such a fascinating concept because then when we go to bed and we read the bedtime story to our children, what, does that not exist? Does that love? Can you not feel that? And somehow, in some way, we have just dichotomized this and said, here's the physical manifestation of reality. That's all governments can deal with. That's all the international order can deal with. The other stuff, you leave that to your own personal house, to your faith, to your what have you. I think that we are starting to realize, and I think many of us have long realized, but I think there's a movement, there was for a long time we thought that, with material prosperity, we'll see the end of faith. That, of course, has been proven to not be the case in many, many different ways. So what we need to do is figure out how to explore the relationship between these two different dimensions of reality. The way I like to think about it, because more of a physical person, is it's the head and the heart. And we don't have a word for those two knowledges together. We have head knowledge and we have heart knowledge, and we can sort of understand what they are, but we don't have them together. And we don't find a way to bring them together.
Hmm.
And I think we have done ourselves a huge disservice
Mhm.
by saying that you have the secular states and they deal with the physical stuff, and then you have the religion and they can only deal with the heart stuff. Because in both cases, we know that states actually deal with heart too. And people are elected because of how they can inspire us, how they can elevate us.
Mm.
And what elevates different people may be different, but we can't deny that a beautiful orator can capture the hearts and minds and then become a president or a prime minister. That is a fact. And it's not because of the content necessarily of the material dimension of their words. It's because of the connection that we have felt. At the same time, we know that religion inspires people to take action. So much is done for the betterment of humanity in the name of religion, and also so much is done for the
That.
detriment, thank you, to the detriment of humanity in the name of religion. That just means that religion is a huge force in
Mhm.
the lives of people.
Mhm.
How that force is channeled is really up to us. And as long as these two knowledges are somehow separated and their domains are treated as independent domains, we're all losing out on the beauty, the richness that can come when they're woven together. And
Yeah,
I don't know what it looks like. I don't have the answer, but if we're not even asking the question, we're not going to get to that answer together.
beautiful. So I would beg to differ ever so slightly on one point only, which is, well, actually on one point, but there's also a comment about your, I think, excellent description and categorization of heart and mind knowledge. I believe that faith combines the mind and the heart. That is the knowledge that is the combined. But I also don't think that religion and faith are the same thing. Yeah. And I think that as long as
Excellent,
we see
excellent.
them together, we seem to, confuse one with the other. We actually do create the conditions that make it possible for detriment of human welfare. When we distinguish, and you did the beautiful job of doing that in the beginning when you were describing your learning about, wait a minute, there is religion, and then there's what people do in its name. Um, there is faith, and there is religion that is meant to be the epitome of the faith, but is fundamentally what humans do and how they organize and how they live. And I believe these are distinct things. It's not that they're disconnected, but they are distinct. So my faith is the wisdom, the knowledge of heart and mind together. My religion, especially looking at religious institutions, religious leaders, certain religious communities and practices, may not necessarily actually be connected to that. And certainly people will speak about it, people will attribute, but there is a difference between this wisdom and what happens in the name of religions sometimes. And I need to hold on to that as a human being, especially in a world like this. But it also has implications, Dan, I think, and you can correct me, um, but I think it has implications for when we begin to evaluate and to look a little bit critically, but also constructively, at what it is that religions bring to the global table, right? Religions bring to the global table. And if we look at some of that critically and constructively, do you not think that we might have a chance to see how it is that perhaps religions themselves, especially religious institutions, may not be, or let's say they're not perfect faith instruments. I'm being very diplomatic here. But if we just see that there's a tension between faiths and religious institutions and religious dynamics, might we not find a spark of hope in faith? Whereas if we simply focus on the religious all the time, we may actually lose faith rather quickly. What do you think of that? It's honestly something I'm thinking about. I don't have a say, but where do you see that?
So firstly, I was just another silly thing. I feel as if I put out an idea in a raw form, and then you take it with like if it's a piece of wood, you take it and you sand it a little bit to smooth it out. And I'm very grateful for the additions because I'm just sort of chatting, and I think that your refinement is very helpful. Um, yeah, I think that we as humans have a problem with learning. And I'll get to how this is an answer to your query in a moment. But one notion of how we learn as a society is determining right and wrong. And we say this is right, and we then have to defend its rightness. And we then start to think that this is truth because we defend the rightness of this idea. And we hear evidence to the contrary, and yet we are taught that we have to have the courage of our convictions and maintain our truth despite, what may run counter to it, despite what we hear that runs counter to it. And I think that this comes through in really subtle ways. Um, for example, we expect our leaders to have the answers and to not change in light of new information. It's actually a weakness in our conception of leadership when people change their minds. But actually, that should be our greatest strength, is our capacity to learn and grow in light of new information. That is called science. And I think the same has
Sometimes
happened.
called, forgive me, it's also sometimes called, and I don't mean to be facetious, but it is true, sometimes called women's intuition, by the way.
Yes. I mean, last week I was at a meeting of the Global Women Leaders Voices for Change and Inclusion. So GWL is bringing women leaders together, and I'm always grateful that I'm invited to tag along and learn. And there is something different that comes out of those gatherings, and I don't think it's by accident. Um, yeah, I would say it's women's intuition, but I also would say that it is human intuition that in many ways men are taught not to express. I actually think we all have that intuition to some degree,
Mhm.
but this is one of the challenges of gender discrimination on both sides, is that we all miss out from those intuitive powers that we all have. But I do think that there's something special about women's intuition. I will maintain that despite my own desire not to us and them into different groups. Be that as it may, I see this coming through this fear of learning, fear of change coming through not only in the political spheres, but also in the religious spheres. Some of the most interesting, I think, understandings of different religions come from those who are trying to measure religion against the reality of the world that they see. The reality that we see today is that men and women are equal. We have equal capacity to do nearly everything. I mean, men can't give birth to children, but otherwise, we can pretty much all do everything. So we have this equal capacity, and yet some of our religious texts or religious interpretations have said that that's not true. That cognitive dissonance should lead us to new understandings rather than cause us to entrench ourselves further and then to marginalize further. And here I think is one of the distinctions between religious institution and faith. And that is that to me, faith is actually a scientific methodology where you test an idea, you see how it works, and then you change in light of evidence. And so, you say a prayer, you feel better. Maybe I should say a prayer again. Or something is consoled in your heart, or you have this deep connection with someone through a devotional or through music or what have you. That is something that you should follow. That is an intuition that you should follow, not something that you should eschew and say, this doesn't align with my preconceived notions. So I think, what am I saying here? This religious institution and faith sort of distinction is in some ways because many religious institutions are trying to maintain their legitimacy and meaning, and in some sense, without, I don't think it's malicious, but their claim on truth, exclusive claim on truth, which is very dangerous because none of us have truth. And if none of us have truth, then all of us need to be learning. But for a religious institution to come out and say that, it runs contrary in many ways to our understanding of knowledge and our understanding of the role of the religious institution, of the religious leader. And so I think this is some of the cognitive dissonance that we're seeing, and why I think that learning and growth is such an important dimension of whatever comes next. We have to learn in our politics, we have to learn in our science, we have to learn in our religion, because unless we're doing so, we're going to further entrench ourselves in these systems of knowledge that do not align with the reality that we can see with our own two eyes.
Brilliant, thank you. I have just two more last questions, Dan, and in a sense, they're evoked by virtue of how you are analyzing, explaining things so brilliantly. And one question has to do with the fact that do you think that our current religious institutions and communities and official houses, if you will, that represent religion, do you see them as an alternative to the political, other cultural and social institutions, or do you see them as I'm addressing this notion that religion can give us, it can give us an alternative, it can give us a wisdom, it can give us a justice, it can give us whatever, which is a very right leaning way of thinking in many religious contexts. I'm trying to address that notion to see your thinking about it. Do you really think that religions are an alternative to the way that society and politics function today? Or do you see them, obviously, do you see different religions and religious institutions providing a backup, alternative backup, or support to the existing context of politics and society? How do you see those relationships exactly?
That is a very challenging question. My first instinct, and I hope that you allow me to learn as I as I go through this, but my first instinct is just to say that the question, I'm replacing religion with mathematics again. How do you see mathematics as useful to the international order? Well, it's a system of knowledge. It is something that we cannot, it is not the exclusive system of knowledge, but it is a meaningful system of knowledge upon which we should be basing our decisions. If it is inconsistent with mathematics, we know it's not going to work because there's a mathematical problem. Just look at the consumption of resources on a finite planet. We cannot constantly be growing. There's a literal mathematical bound to the consumption, full stop. So policies that do not take into consideration that mathematical bound are limited in their capacity to advance human well-being, at least forever. Maybe in the short term, they can accomplish something. This is a question on the mind about, consumption patterns and all of this. Religion, I see quite similarly. It is a system of knowledge. Now, I don't know the role of religious institutions and how they should or could be engaging with the international political sphere, because there is a power to religion that can be wielded in ways that may not be welcomed by all or may not be fully inclusive. Now, if religion is meeting its highest aspirations of well-being for all humanity and non-distinction of hierarchies in terms of people's qualities, like one religion is not better than another, we're all souls trying to figure out reality. If it's being practiced in that way, then I think that it is a wonderful tool, like mathematics, like science, like literature, to help us to understand reality and make better decisions. Now, the role of these things is actually a really important question, because some can devote themselves entirely to religion their whole lives and do so much good for the world, for their community, and for themselves. And I think that there is a tremendous validity to that for that individual and whomever they're affecting. And I wouldn't want to say that is not a role that can be occupied within a governance system. I think that there is a way to do it. I'm not entirely sure how, though, because there's like an inherent, almost inherent, it needn't be, but at the moment, there's an inherent sort of exclusion that comes from religion. Whereas once you've applied a certain label to a thing, does it mean that you're not interested in the well-being of others? So if I'm a Baha'i, does that mean I don't care about Muslims? To me, absolutely not. But to some others, they might interpret that.
Absolutely not. That's not how you would say it, as opposed to absolutely not care about Muslims.
That's right.
Just an important distinction there. Thank you. Yeah.
It's a vital distinction. Absolutely not. I would, yes, what you said. Um, so this is but I could see, and I have in fact seen it. My wife is not a Baha'i. And as we were learning about each other, she really had to think, wait, Dan, you're not judging me because I'm not a Baha'i. You're not treating me differently. And I said, yes, this is my understanding of religion. That you're on your own journey, and the name that you ascribe to your own beliefs is up to you, and I've ascribed this name to mine. And but what matters is how we are living our lives. And I think that if religion is conceived of in that way, then I do think it can have a more explicit role in the affairs of international governance. When it comes to the clubbiness of religion, you're in this church or you're in that congregation or what have you, that's when I start to wonder, are there ulterior motives? Like, because historically there have been ulterior motives, and we have to face that reality.
Mhm.
But again, I want to return to this idea of learning. This
Mm.
is something that if we don't ask the question and we don't explore, then we are certainly missing out on such a vital element of understanding, but we have to approach it in a learning mode. We do not know the answer for how these two things can go together, but they have to go together because no person leaves their God at the door when they walk through. I am religious no matter where I am. So that means that in a secular space, I'm still a Baha'i, and you're still a Muslim, or what, everybody's still who they are. So we cannot compartmentalize everything. So the question is, how do we integrate the different knowledges into our decision-making processes more effectively?
Well said. Do you think, this is my last question to you, do you think that our current interfaith world has that sensitivity and respect for knowledge and learning that you have elaborated so beautifully? Do you see that in the interfaith world?
That is something that I struggle with in the interfaith world. I fear that the dimensions of religion that a younger Dan did not like, um, I see them more than I would like. Now, it's not to say that the people aren't wonderful and well-meaning, but the motivating forces are really hard. We live in a materialist society. We
Mm,
need funding, we need legitimacy, we need all of these things. And sometimes that colors the purity of motive
mm,
that I think we all are entering with. And so it's not to besmirch the religions, certainly, and it's not to even besmirch the individuals, but I think it's something that it's a posture that we could use a bit more humility, and that goes for me too. And I wrote a piece, and you very helpfully wrote a response that said you're kind of demeaning yourself, Dan, in your own understanding. And I'm so grateful that you felt comfortable enough to do that. I don't know that I have the courage to do that to others.
mhm,
And maybe I need to improve in my own capacity to offer candid and loving feedback the way that you did to me, because that's the only way we can grow. And so I don't want to impugn any space in particular, but I think that this is an area that we could do with a bit of deepening our understanding and our approach and strengthening the trust across our different faiths. Because ultimately, as far as I'm concerned, they're really just one faith. Mathematics is one thing.
agree.
And if we can't speak to each other honestly within this circle of mathematics, how are we going to make change outside of it?
Mm,
So I I'm trying not to say yes or no because there are pockets of both.
yeah.
But I do think it's an area that we could stand to learn quite a bit more about. And this goes for myself, first among many.
Daniel Perell, thank you very much indeed for your wisdom and for your thoughtfulness and consideration, not only in terms of sharing, but also in terms of making yourself available with such deliberate, studious, learned humility, as you said. I think that's the basis of wisdom. And I think you exemplify it in so many ways, in the way you write, in the way you speak, and certainly in the way you serve. You and I think, share a passion for service as acts of faith. And we also share a passion for truth. Um, I might be a bit more forward in demanding it, of people around me. I guess it has to do with age, but also with being beaten so much from so many different corners all the time, that ultimately the only recourse is to realize you're going to be beaten anyway. You might as well say the truth, and hope that those who are beating can see it, can feel it, can hear it, and may stop beating at some point.
If I could just quickly jump in on that, I
Sure.
think we all have a different voice and a different role to play. And I come with a number of privileges to many of these spaces, and I acknowledge that. And so the role that I can play is different from the role that others play. And we're all doing our best. And with that, I certainly agree with you.
And I think it is very important that you said about different roles, but I think the commitment to a general human welfare, the common good, is very much shared. And in a way, it should be our ultimate reason for service. And so I want to thank you for your service, your continued service, but also for your wisdom and empathy, compassion, and absolutely the humility that you showed, that is not to demean, but actually enlightens even further. So thank you for being Daniel Perell. Thank you for representing the Baha'i community and always being such a source of inspiration. Thank you very much, Daniel Perell.
I could say the same, Aza. Thank you.